Right, hello everybody. Just a quick emergency video, sort of flash in the pan deal. There seems to be a troubling new trend going around TikTok primarily, but also some YouTube videos and a few social media posts of a new study that claims that scientists were able to use stem cells taken from women's bone marrow to form sperm cells, and then use those sperm cells to self-impregnate the woman to the point where she can reproduce a viable offspring, and that the viable offspring are almost always male. Now, this normally wouldn't be much cause for alarm. Pseudoscience perpetuates the biology community pretty roughly. However, these videos kind of hold a darker truth, and I just kind of want to get ahead of this and address it a little bit. I have a standard TikTok video we're going to play in a second. It's by no means a unique one or a crazy out there. This is a pretty average TikTok for the subject.
This is just a reminder for men that scientists have now discovered a way for women to impregnate themselves using their own bone marrow, and the only child that can result from those pregnancies are female. So we no longer have any need for you, genetically or physically. So, tread lightly.
So yes, this character happens to be a TERF. Not a lot of shock there. She tends to belong to that group of women who I can only kind of call them the vagina cult or the anti-male type women. The types who hide behind feminism to promote their ideas and their agendas. They themselves are not actual feminists, as we can see with this rhetoric. Let's start with her first thing, that essentially she boils a male's position of maleness down to genetically and physical capabilities. This is to say that essentially men's worth is defined on their ability to have kids. So by her own definition, men who are infertile or sterile or don't want to have kids aren't true men. If they serve no purpose to the society, they're not real men. And in that capacity, the serving society she talks on is probably that of utility based on her other works, and based on a lot of these other women's ideas of how men should function in society, as essentially a sort of cruise missile with a penis on it. Which is very much purporting toxic masculinity. The idea that men are designed to serve, reproduce, and then die in service to something else. Which already right then there pretty much goes against a lot of tenets of feminism, because most tenets of feminism actually do support men. She's also boiling the ideas of women down to the point of fertility. That really the only reason women needed men was to make them fertile. That other women wouldn't like men for having a male companion, or that you can't form a true relationship with a male. No, men are just these big, dumb, ugly creatures that sit around and eat up all the chips and salsa. Also, I'm not even going to try and bring up the fact that there's trans people to consider too with this person, because again, as I said, she is a TERF. But essentially what you're saying is that if women don't fulfill the role of being able to reproduce, an argument that most women kind of had an issue with back in the 1960s, that they are not true women. And I guarantee you that if you consider trans women women as I do, this would be an issue for this person because of obvious complications there. But let's not go into the big issues on that, because let's be real, I'm a white male. I'm not really able to speak on feminism in any real capacity. Let's instead kind of move over to what this assumes in society. So, when we have society, we have humans. Typically you have a male and a female, or, a mommy and a daddy, and they reproduce and make some kids. We carry half of our genetic lineage from one parent, and half of our genetic lineage from the other parent. And this allows our DNA to be a mixture of multiple people. This is a diversity concept, where the more diversity you have a gene pool, the more access to mutations, the more functionality you have stable mutations. This is good. Gene pools benefit a lot from having multiple different partners contribute multiple aspects to a gene pool. In biology, when you tend to have a smaller gene pool, what is classified as inbreeding, and yes, the crazies from The Hills Have Eyes do count for this, you tend to limit the genetic material. Now, in a lot of creatures, this is actually very useful. A limited gene pool allows for faster adaptation in a lot of creatures. It also allows for a more unstable gene pool to allow for new animals to come in and form offshoot hybrid strains. It makes the gene pool more malleable. Not so with humans, because we're social creatures and we're a little more complicated. Why am I bringing this up? Because while having sex with your sister is a really bad idea, not only because there's a lot of moral issues with it, but also because the child is going to typically have a higher risk for genetic maleffects. You and your mom and your dad both had genetic mutations when they had the kids, and those genetic mutations are often shared amongst siblings. To put it short, if you have sex with your sister, and the chances of having Down syndrome are 1 in 50, 1 in 3, depending on what the mutation is. And that's just within your own genetic gene pool. Now, of course, at one point in time, we could say that with inbreeding, we at least did have 2 different genetic stocks to begin with, the mother and the father, and then in one generation, the brother and sister, we had some fouling. When you are literally taking your own genetic lineage and using it to reproduce yourself, that's just going to cause the chances for birth defects to skyrocket. I wouldn't be surprised if this study that they're claiming, which we'll get to in a moment, didn't account for any amount of ethics considerations and the fact that most of the offspring being made would be non-viable. But let's actually take a look at this study. It did take me a while to track it down, and you'll be surprised at what we find. Okay, so here is the study as far as I could track it down. I apologize for the bad quality, but you'll have to forgive me. I was doing this pretty late. So, first and foremost, this is by Future, which is a BBC-associated user magazine. And the official title is that fatherless pregnancies happen in nature more than we thought, says Frank Swain, who wants stopping human beings from doing the same. So what's stopping human beings from being the same? Sorry, I apologize. So first and foremost, this is a pretty well-known fact to most biologists. In fact, when you start learning about single-cell organisms and cell biology, you'll learn this. It's mitosis versus meiosis. What you also learn is that typically this is done amongst less complicated organisms than, say, humans. Because they're single-cell organisms, they can kind of get away with this. That being said, though, one of the things about this, first and foremost, is there isn't a scientifically or scholarly article to back this up. There's only tertiary biological research. And we're going to touch on that in just a moment, but this is kind of a big thing to get through. So Frank Swain, by the way, is also not a scientist. He is a scientifical assistant, which means he could have anything from a bachelor's degree to a high school GED. It just depends. He basically just is the guy who specializes in biology and searches out biology stuff. This is also coming to you in essentially a news rag you find on the internet full of native advertising. I won't show you the headline or the link to it because I don't want them to get into traffic, but this was basically full of native advertising. When I pitched this thing, the sidebar you see that it's all whited out was full of ads that I didn't want to get nailed with. So this is a total fluff piece done for people to sell product. And one of the animals that they quote in this study, and another animal that was coming up a lot around the TikTok sphere that this, I want to say video, but I really should say pile of dog shit came about from, is something called a whiptail lizard. This little creature right here on your screen. So, first and foremost, if you're saying, well, Mr. Song, what the fuck does this have to do with women using their bone marrow and lizards? That's a good question. I asked myself that too. Apparently, the whiptail lizard, which is nicknamed the lesbian lizard by pretty much people exclusively producing these same videos on TikTok, is a type of lizard that's a hybrid from 2 sexually reproducing parent species that commits to parthenogenesis. Now, if you go and look up a lot of this parthenogenesis stuff, it is a pretty common term in biology, but it's one of those words that has been adopted by the social norm to mean something it doesn't. In the same way that a lot of science has been weaponized on this subject. So, a little refresher on our friend the whiptail lizard. The whiptail lizard is a hybrid of 2 sexually reproducing parent species. So, right then and there, it's not a full-on species unto itself. So, it's not like this defense of their point is a really good point. This is to say that the parent and the mother both commit to reproductive organs, and these are 2 separate species that come together with enough genetic lineage close enough to produce a viable offspring, thus being the whiptail lizard. The whiptail lizards commit by parthenogenesis. So there's a difference between reproduction and parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis, for lack of a better word, is more or less cloning. You are making a variation of yourself that has very few changes. I'm talking like an almost 99% copy of yourself, or a lizard, to basically just have your genes there for the next generation. So how this works is, if a lot of lizards happened to live on archipelagos and islands way back in the olden days, and as the archipelagos submitted to tectonic maneuvering of the various periods, these islands would move apart, or these lizards would get separated to the point where they couldn't interact with each other. One of the ways that you could survive is by forming relationships with whatever species you could reproduce with, thus ensuring your genes would pass on to at least one other generation, thus hybrids. On the same point, you could have a lizard commit to parthenogenesis, which is to produce an exact clone for one more generation. The clone isn't great, its DNA is highly unstable in a lot of organisms, but your genes are there for another organism. And while parthenogenesis is pretty effective for one or two generations of clones to perpetuate your species, which these lizards tend to do that, by about the third generation, the offsprings are no longer viable. And also, another fun fact is that these whiptail lizards, these lesbian lizards as they're called, actually do engage with sexual reproduction with males of the parent species or males from the mother species. So these creatures aren't exclusively mating with each other or committing to parthenogenesis. It's just a survival tactic to ensure the genes move forward, to commit to the biological imperative. Humans don't do this. Humans don't need to do this. Humans live in a different society than lizards on some archipelago or in arid climates. So there's your first part there. This isn't actual reproduction, and this isn't a separate species. The other thing, too, is that cloning for two generations isn't uncommon in lizards and very simple animals. This is kind of a way... biology tends to have multiple roads to the same avenue, survival. So with certain lizards, they commit to parthenogenesis. Think of this kind of like how frogs or a lot of other amphibians will commit to transmorphology or transmorphism, where you'd have a bunch of females in a space, and then one of them will transition into a male frog to genetically inseminate the females and produce a lineage. It's not the perfect excuse, it's not the greatest, it's not preferable, but it does continue the species for at least one generation, maybe two, at best three. Life finds a way. This is how it does that. Humans are a lot more complex than amphibians and lizards, however. We're a lot more evolved. We don't have the lizard brains anymore. So again, this really isn't the counter that the article and subsequent people think it is. Also, not to mention, very obviously, humans have entirely separate reproductive systems. Where humans have wombs and uteri, and they are bathed, the uterus and the fetus is bathed in maternal blood, lizards have an ovipositor and a cloaca. So, very separate things. This is kind of like saying, well, because lizards at one point in time lizards have the ability to regrow limbs if they get them bitten off, and humans at one point in time shared a common ancestor with lizards, we should be able to unlock that DNA signature and allow us to grow back limbs. There's a lot more complications to that. While it is technically true, it's not functionally true. That's pretty much what I want to get with this real fast. Just arguing this, it's not a scientific article, it's not even really true. But now let's kind of go into the darker issues that this narrative kind of clings to, and a lot of other narratives along these lines tend to cling to. So, this is kind of an issue I have first and foremost, and a lot of this has to do with the comments, but one of the big issues that biologists face is that often our knowledge is weaponized against people's best interests. One of the things that a lot of biologists are very afraid of publishing anything outside of scholarly publications or university magazines is because people tend to take the learnings and teachings of biology and use them for nefarious purposes. You see this a lot with weight loss people. Anytime a new study comes out on biology about health and physical wellness or biochemistry, it's instantly pushed through and turned into an advertising machine for some new power supplement. But I would be willing to forgive a lot of these misconceptions if they weren't hiding a darker truth. And that is what she said in the final part of the video, that, because we now don't need men anymore, we can reproduce and all be lesbians. Which is also, real quick, really fucked up that this woman would assume that all women want to be lesbians. That is forcing a sexuality onto some people. Some people are non-binary. Some people are asexual. Some people are straight. Some people are pan. Some people are poly. And some people are bi. There's a lovely rainbow spectrum of sexualities and genders and all types of identity. And to funnel all that down to a entire, essentially the island of Lesbos, is really fucked up and telling of what the true agenda is. To enforce a strict doctrine onto people. And this is also very telling. This woman is advocating, as long as a lot of other people on this TikTok, what they're advocating for with this bone marrow semen self-impregnation system is to destroy men, to get rid of men entirely. They want the systematic eradication of an entire sect of people based solely upon the fact that they are not considered genetically pure to the in-group. Despite what the individuals have done to the in-group, their guilt is passed on to all those of their genetic lineage. And so they must be eradicated for being considered sub or lesser than. This sounds a lot like Nazi ideology to me. Forced eugenics, a policy wherein only women who can bear wombs can exist, and ultimately, it just screams of the nastiness behind these people. They don't like men for whatever their reasons may be, but I don't think we need to systematically destroy all men. What happens to the women who actually enjoy men? What happens to the women who want to get pregnant in the traditional sense? Do they not get a choice? What happens to all the men who have been good allies and tried to help women out as best they can in the changing world? Is their sins of the father too much for them to exhume themselves? If this is the case to make, why on earth would anybody support you? And more overly, let's just assume real fast in this brave new world they have that yes, that was what science decided. That we are going to basically eradicate all men through a process of taking women's bone marrow and impregnating a bunch of women with a bunch of gene pools and turning a pregnancy and a very simple 20 minutes into a long, drawn-out procedure with plenty of gene smiths and parthenogenesis and all this good stuff. What happens if there's a wild-type mutation during the reproduction process and a boy is born? Because you see, what these people don't understand is that all humans essentially start out as a female in the womb through fetal development, and then only through hormone washing, specifically testosterone, does a male appear. Your body still produces male testosterone. The fact that these allegedly creatures, which are, in the study, the creatures they're referencing are mostly asexual, so gender really doesn't mean anything because they reproduce asexually. What happens if, in this brave new world, by a wild-type mutation, a boy appears? Do you just kill it? Do you just abort it because it had the audacity to be born to have a genetic lineage? What happens to the mother who produced the boy? Is she tainted because she didn't produce a female in your perfect world? And moreoverly, what happens to all the genetic benefits that come from the Y chromosome, that are carried on the Y chromosome from the father? Genetic defects for sure. There are genetic malfunctions that affect Y chromosomes, colorblindness primarily. But what happens to all that? This sounds like a eugenics for a racially pure people that wasn't exactly thought out. Because you're basically asking for the species to end. And this is not the way forward. And I hate the fact that people are using biology to do this. Because these women are not feminists. These women are Nazis that are using feminism and biology to cloak themselves to get this agenda passed. To support a gynocentric agenda, which I support women getting a better shake in life, and I support them moving forward. And yes, men and our ancestors have done a lot of heinous shit, specifically white men. But that doesn't mean we need to systematically wipe them all out and make decisions. A small group of population gets to make decisions for the greater whole of humanity based solely upon their own personal preferences. And this led to me actually pulling what is known in biology and biological camps as the Proteus Protocol. For those of you who don't know, in a lot of biology camps, there was a promise and an honor made a long time ago amongst biologists to always maintain the sanctity of biology first and foremost, and no matter what your disagreements are amongst camps and factions, we never allow things like Nazi ideology to perpetuate through biology. Think of, if you will, race realism. The only people who perpetuate race realism online are folks like JF, who have been discredited in a lot of universities and not allowed to talk or publish their papers. Their credentials were pulled. The guy who made the one report that said vaccines cause autism and published it in no scientific journals and crapped it out one time to a magazine in the late 1990s. His rights of being a scientist and his scientific standards were revoked. Biology has done a lot to self-prune itself from all those who perpetuate these types of twisted ideologies. And we're doing a damn good job of it, and we have to keep it up. And that's what the Proteus Protocol is. Think of the fire of Prometheus being brought down to humans. This was knowledge, this was creation, this was something we could use. And then there was just that one guy who had to go take it, dip his arrow in it, and shoot somebody else and burn down a house. That knowledge is not to be used as a weapon. And this is one of the things that biology hates, because biologists know we come from a long lineage of people using the natural sciences of biology to commit horrible atrocities. The Holocaust, mostly backed up by biology. Phrenology, the study of measuring people's heads to decide what their brain capacity was, backed up by biology. Slavery, in a lot of cases, when the Bible failed, the idea that black people were inferior to us, because white people, because of genetic malfeasance, was used. Even going far back to Socrates, calling anybody with a larger dick who wore pants a barbarian based on biological similarities. Incels and black pillars back up their facts with biology. Racists who try to think race is a real thing and not just a social construct, back it up with biology. The conservatives are flooding into biology markets now, trying to use whatever little scraps of information they can pull to produce some type of belief system to back up their bullshit. And these TERFs are pretty much just the same. They're not going to help anybody. They're just trying to promote their ideas. And I find it quite interesting as well that a lot of these women who are perpetuating these TikToks about this stuff are white. White females. I could make an argument about wanting racial purity, because I guarantee you that once the men get cast off, those white women will probably turn to black females and start cleaning up that gene pool too. They'll probably use words like degenerate. And a lot of them got in arguments with me. I was blocked on so many TikToks for arguing these points, and these are fairly simple points to back up, and yet nobody considered them worthwhile because they came out of a man's mouth. Oh, the tragedy. This is something we have to watch out for. This is something that the biologists fight. When I talk about the perpetuation of biology, this is part of that. Anytime this stuff pops up, biologists have to be the first to knock it down and constantly fight it. It's one of the reasons why our research tends to drag on a lot, because biology has to constantly fight everybody and their uncle trying to use our studies to perpetuate their agendas. And this blends into a bigger issue that I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said best in his recent interview, or debate, or whatever you want to call it, with Ben Shapiro. That he's very, very scared to find any studies on trans or gay people leading to a genetic marker for gay or trans, in the fear that people will legislate rules to affect those people. Science wants to know, but people seem all too willing to take the knowledge and use as a weapon to legislate these people out of existence. And I guarantee you that these women would be doing this too if they had the political capital to do so. So, yeah. Now, is this natural, inbreeding and self-reproduction? I guess in a natural sense, yeah, some creatures do it. Most humans don't. Is it possible for humans to self-impregnate with technology? Sure, I mean, it's possible to do a lot of things. But now we get to the biggest question that every biologist has to ask before they ever go forward with publishing their findings. Just because it's natural, and just because we can, doesn't mean that we should. Yes, humans can reproduce with an inbreeding that does tend to account for these types of things. Yes, humans could in theory wipe out the male population with nothing more than systematic breeding and a fuck ton of genetic engineering. But should we? And the answer is a very firm no. This is one of those times where we need to dig in our heels and say we will not exterminate people because a small group doesn't like men. And you're not, I repeat, not going to use my field of study and all of the benefits that we have done and all the hard work we have done to move forward and every drop of blood and sweat that was dripped onto a page to clean up biology and to make it something that actually benefits the world now, so we can go back to the times where people did the exact same thing. So fuck you and stay away from my textbooks.